frozen, bound, and left for dead in a Montana storm. Park Ranger Jack Callahan faced his final moments. Then, a ghost materialized through the blizzard. His K9 partner, a German shepherd, lost 5 years prior in a deadly fire. Was it salvation or a trick of the dying light? The impossible reunion that follows will shatter your understanding of loyalty. These stories deserve to be told. Subscribe now if you believe in the unbreakable power of an animal's love. The cold in Montana was a clean kind of cold. It filled the lungs with the crisp scent of pine and ice and settled deep in the bones, a stark contrast to the heat that lived in Jack Callahan's memory. 5 years had passed since the California wildfires had stolen everything, yet he could still feel the searing air, still taste the ash. He had come here to the remote White Pine Creek Ranger Station to escape the ghosts of smoke and flame, hoping the vast, frozen silence of the mountains near Glacier National Park might finally quiet the echoes of his failure. At 32, Jack had the lean, hard-muscled frame of a man who lived outdoors, but his eyes, the color of a stormy gray sea, held a weariness that went far beyond his years. He moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose, a solitude that kept his new colleagues at a respectful distance. He wanted it that way. Attachments were a liability. He'd learned that the hard way. His new supervisor, Elias Vance, was a man who seemed to be carved from the mountains themselves. Nearing 60, Eli had a face etched with the lines of 1,000 winters and a steady, assessing gaze that missed nothing. He was the head ranger, and he ran his station with a no-nonsense pragmatism that Jack found grounding. The main thing you need to worry about isn't the grizzlies waking up hungry, Eli said, leaning against the doorframe of Jack's small office. He held a steaming mug of coffee, his presence filling the room. It's the two-legged kind of predator. We've got a crew of illegal loggers working somewhere deep in the North Quadrant. They're getting bold, taking down old-growth cedar like they own the place. Jack nodded, his focus sharpening. This was good. This was a problem he could solve, a tangible enemy he could track. Any leads? Eli took a slow sip of his coffee. Just whispers. They move like smoke. And then there's the other story the locals are telling. He paused, a flicker of something almost like amusement in his eyes. They talk about a ghost dog. Say there's a big German shepherd, smart as a whip, that's been surviving out there for a year or more. Some hunters saw it take down a deer by itself. Others see its tracks near their cabins after a snowstorm. They say it moves like a shadow, never lets anyone get close. The words hit Jack with the force of a physical blow, a sudden, sharp intake of breath he couldn't hide. German shepherd. Smart. Alone. The image rose in his mind, unbidden and brutal. Kaiser. His Kaiser had been a magnificent sable German shepherd, barely 3 years old, when the world had turned to fire. He was all muscle, intelligence, and a loyalty so profound it felt like a part of Jack's own soul. In his memory, Kaiser's amber eyes were bright with life, his powerful body always coiled with energy, ready for the next command, the next adventure. The memory shifted to the day of the fire. The sky was an apocalyptic orange, choked with smoke that clawed at the throat. They had been evacuating a trapped family when the wind turned. The roar was deafening. A freight train of flame consuming everything in its path. A burning lodgepole pine had crashed down, separating them. Jack had screamed Kaiser's name, his voice raw and useless against the inferno. He had searched until his own uniform began to smolder, until the rescue crews dragged him away. They never found a body. In the chaos and devastation, Kaiser was simply gone, presumed to have perished, another soul consumed by the blaze. Jack? Eli's voice pulled him back to the cold Montana office. Jack blinked, the ghosts receding, leaving the familiar ache of guilt in their wake. He forced a neutral expression onto his face. It's just folklore, Eli. A stray dog that people are romanticizing. Animals don't survive winters like this out there, alone for long. Not a domestic breed. It was a lie he had to believe. To even consider the possibility that a dog like Kaiser could be out there, alone and suffering, was a torment he couldn't bear. It was easier to believe he was gone. It was kinder. Eli shrugged, accepting the dismissal. Probably right. Just thought you should know what people are saying. Your focus should be the loggers. They're our real problem. He pushed off the doorframe. Welcome to White Pine Creek, Callahan. Try not to get lost. After Eli left, Jack stood motionless for a long time, staring out the window at the endless expanse of snow-laden pines. He could feel the familiar weight pressing down on his chest, the guilt that had been his constant companion for 5 years. He had failed his partner. He had run from the fire, from California, from the pity in everyone's eyes. Here, there would be no failure. He would find these loggers. He would hunt them down with a singular focus, a relentless purpose that would leave no room for memories or ghosts. He would pour all his pain and regret into this new fight, because it was the only way he knew how to survive. The ghost dog was just a story, he told himself again, a campfire tale for long winter nights. His ghost had died in the fire, and he was determined to leave him buried. The forest floor was a tapestry of secrets written in the snow, and Jack Callahan was an expert at reading them. For 3 days, he patrolled the northern quadrant, his mind a razor-sharp tool focused on a single purpose. The cold no longer bothered him. The obsessive hunt for the illegal loggers had become a fire within, burning away the need for anything else. He moved through the dense woods with a predator's grace, noting every broken twig, every unnatural depression in the snow. This was a language he understood far better than the quiet conversations back at the station. He found their handiwork on the 4th day. Tucked away in a valley shielded by a high granite ridge was a scene of brutal violation. A dozen ancient cedars, giants that had stood for centuries, lay slaughtered on the ground. The air, usually clean and sharp, hung heavy with the scent of sawdust and spilled fuel. A cold fury settled in Jack's gut. This wasn't just theft. It was desecration. As he circled the grim clearing, something else caught his eye. Near the edge of the tree line, half hidden beneath a dusting of fresh snow, was a crude snare trap, its wire loop poised to catch any creature unlucky enough to pass by. He found 2 more nearby, rusted and lethal. These men weren't just taking trees, they were tearing the life out of this forest, without a second thought. He was close. He could feel it. As he knelt to disarm one of the traps, a flicker of movement on the ridge above him made him freeze. He slowly lifted his gaze. There, silhouetted against the pale winter sky, stood a German shepherd. It was at least 200 yards away, a dark, noble shape against the white landscape. It stood with a profound stillness, its head held high, watching him. Jack's breath caught in his throat. It was too far to see details, but the powerful set of the shoulders, the slight forward cant of the ears, the proud line of the back, it was all painfully, achingly familiar. Then the dog turned its head. A swift, alert motion to scan the trees behind it, and Jack's carefully constructed walls crumbled. It was the exact same gesture, a unique, almost imperceptible tilt of the head that Kaiser used to do when assessing a new environment. A ghost of a memory, so vivid it hurt, flashed through his mind. Kaiser making that same motion in a sun-dappled training field in California, his amber eyes bright with intelligence. For a breathtaking second, Jack's heart screamed a name he hadn't dared to whisper in 5 years. Kaiser. But just as quickly, the cold logic of reality crashed back down. It was impossible. A trick of the light, his grief-addled mind projecting a fantasy onto a random stray. Kaiser was gone. He had to be. Clenching his jaw, Jack forced himself to look away, back down at the trap in his hands, his knuckles white from the pressure. When he looked up again, the ridge was empty. The ghost was gone. Shaken, Jack made his way back toward the main trail. His earlier focus shattered. The image of the dog on the ridge haunted him. As he neared the edge of the park boundary, where a few rustic cabins and a small lodge huddled against the woods, he saw a small figure dart away from the tree line. It was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, bundled in a bright pink coat and a purple hat. She was clutching an empty plastic container. "Hey!" Jack called out, his voice gruff, more from his own inner turmoil than any anger toward her. "You shouldn't be out here alone." The girl stopped and turned. She had a small, serious face with rosy cheeks and large, startlingly blue eyes that held no fear, only a quiet curiosity. She looked him over, from his ranger uniform to the grim set of his jaw. "I'm not alone," she said simply. "I live right there." She pointed a mittened hand toward a cozy-looking lodge with a curl of smoke rising from its chimney. "I'm Lily." Jack softened his tone slightly. "You shouldn't feed the wildlife, Lily. It's dangerous for them. And for you." Lily hugged the empty container to her chest. "He's not wildlife," she corrected him gently. "He's just lost. And he's very smart. He waits until I'm all the way back on the porch before he comes out. I leave him leftovers." A cold dread crept up Jack's spine. "He?" "The dog," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The one who lives in the woods. Grandma calls him the ghost. But I don't think he's a ghost. He just has sad eyes. Really sad. Like he's looking for something he can't find." The girl's words, so simple and earnest, pierced through Jack's denial like a shard of glass. Sad eyes. Looking for something. He knelt, trying to keep his voice steady. "Have you gotten close to him?" Lily shook her head, her purple hat bobbing. "Number he won't let me. But I talk to him sometimes. I told him he doesn't have to be sad forever." Jack stood up slowly, the world feeling unsteady beneath his feet. He gave Lily a final, gentle warning to be careful and watched her run back to the lodge. He stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had left the food, the spot where the dog on the ridge must have been moments ago. Eli's story, the sighting on the ridge, and now this girl's innocent words all swirled together, creating a storm of confusion and a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He had come to Montana to bury his past, but he was beginning to realize that in these mountains, some things refuse to stay buried. Lily's words had unsettled something deep within Jack, a fragile hope he had tried to bury for 5 long years. In the days that followed, he threw himself into his work with a renewed, almost feverish intensity. The hunt for the loggers became more than a job. It was an exorcism. If he could focus solely on this tangible evil, he could perhaps silence the whisper in his heart that sounded so much like a name he dared not speak. He pushed aside Eli's advice to wait for county backup, driven by an impatience that was part duty and part desperation. The lead came on a frigid morning when the sky was the color of lead. He found fresh tracks from a heavy, all-terrain vehicle, tracks that deliberately veered off the marked fire roads and plunged into the dense, untamed wilderness of the Swan Range. This was it. No sanctioned vehicle would be in this area. Ignoring the protocol that screamed in his head, he parked his truck, checked the load in his sidearm, and followed the tracks on foot, disappearing into the silent, imposing forest. He told himself it was just a reconnaissance mission, that he would turn back if things got difficult, but he knew it was a lie. He would not turn back. For hours, he walked. The only sound, the crunch of his boots on the crusted snow. The forest grew thicker, the ancient pines blocking out the sky, creating a world of shadow and silence. The tracks led him to a hidden basin, a place not marked on any map. And there he found it. The loggers' camp was a brutal scar on the pristine landscape. Two makeshift lean-tos stood beside a smoldering fire pit, and nearby, a massive front-end loader sat half-covered by a camouflage tarp. Stacks of freshly cut old-growth timber lay like fallen soldiers, their raw, pale ends a testament to the destruction. A cold, methodical anger took over. He pulled out his camera, documenting everything with steady hands. The brand of the loader, the haphazard stack of fuel cans, the discarded food wrappers. He moved toward one of the lean-tos, and his stomach tightened. Nailed crudely to a support beam were several animal pelts, including that of a Canada lynx, a protected species. These men were not just thieves. They were poachers, killing indiscriminately. He was so focused on the evidence that he didn't hear the whisper of movement behind him. The first sign of danger was not a sound, but a sudden shift in the air, the instinct that screamed he was no longer alone. He spun around, his hand flying to his hip, but it was too late. A heavy blow from a solid object, perhaps a thick branch, struck him square across the temple. Pain exploded behind his eyes in a blinding flash of white, and the world tilted violently. He fought to stay conscious, to bring his weapon to bear, but a second man tackled him from the side, driving him into the hard-packed snow. A brief, desperate struggle ensued, but he was outnumbered and caught by surprise. A final, crushing impact to the back of his head plunged him into a silent, starless abyss. He awoke to pain. A deep, throbbing agony in his skull was the first thing he registered. The second was the cold, a relentless, biting chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. His cheek was pressed against the rough, sap-sticky bark of a massive pine tree. He tried to move, to push himself up, but something held him fast. He blinked, his vision swimming, and looked down. Heavy, rusted chains were wrapped around his chest and arms, binding him tightly to the trunk of the tree. His gloves were gone, his radio was gone, his sidearm was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to rise, but his training forced it down. He assessed his situation. He was high on a windswept ridge, far from the sheltered basin where the camp was. They had moved him. A trickle of something warm and wet ran from his temple down his cheek. Blood. He could hear voices nearby, low and gravelly, the words indistinct. He saw two figures, bulky silhouettes in the graying light, making their way down the ridge. They didn't even look back. They were just leaving him. Then he felt it. A single, delicate snowflake landed on his cheek, melting against his skin. He looked up at the sky. It was thick with churning, dark clouds. Another snowflake fell, then another, then a cascade. A storm was rolling in, a serious one. The wind began to howl, whipping the falling snow into a blinding curtain of white. The loggers knew exactly what they were doing. A bullet would leave evidence, a body to be found. But a man lost in a blizzard, an unfortunate ranger who wandered too far off the trail, his death would be ruled an accident. Nature would be their accomplice. The figures of the men disappeared into the growing storm. The world shrank to the circle of swirling snow around his tree. The cold intensified. No longer just a sensation, but a living thing, draining the strength from his limbs, the hope from his heart. He was alone, chained, and bleeding. A sacrificial offering to the indifferent fury of a Montana winter. He closed his eyes. The image of a laughing girl named Lily and the ghost of a dog on a distant ridge, flickering in his mind before the darkness and the cold began to claim him. The world had dissolved into a maelstrom of white. The snow was no longer falling. It was a physical assault, a relentless horizontal blast that stole the air from Jack's lungs and scoured his exposed skin raw. Consciousness was a flickering candle flame, guttering against the wind. Each time it threatened to extinguish, a jolt of searing pain from his frozen limbs, or the throbbing in his head, would pull him back. He was so cold he no longer shivered. A dangerous warmth, a lethargic peace, was beginning to spread through him. He knew what it meant. It was the final, gentle lie the body tells before it surrenders. His thoughts fragmented, drifting back to the orange glow of the fire, to a phantom sensation of loyal fur pressed against his side. It was over. And then, through the blinding curtain of the storm, a shadow emerged. At first he thought it was a hallucination, a final trick of a dying mind. It was dark, four-legged, and moving with a purpose that seemed impossible in the blizzard. It drew closer, resolving from a formless shade into the unmistakable shape of a German shepherd, the dog from the ridge, the ghost. It stopped a few feet away, head low, ears flattened against the wind. It seemed older up close, its magnificent sable coat flecked with gray around the muzzle and scarred by years of hardship. The dog took a cautious step forward, and another, until it stood directly in front of him. Jack's heart gave a painful, sluggish lurch. The dog lifted its head, and their eyes met. They were amber, just like he remembered. But where they had once held the bright fire of youth, they now held a deep, ancient sorrow, a weary wisdom that spoke of lonely winters and a long, patient search. And there, just above the left eye, was a faint, silvery line, nearly hidden in the thick fur, a scar from a barbed wire fence during a training exercise in the foothills of the Sierras, a scar he had cleaned and tended to himself. A choked, disbelieving sound escaped Jack's lips, a ragged puff of air. Kaiser? The name, spoken aloud for the first time in 5 years, hung in the frozen air between them. The dog whined softly, a low, mournful sound. It stepped forward and gently, so gently, licked the back of Jack's hand, where it was chained to his side, tasting the frozen blood. In that single, tender touch, 5 years of doubt, denial, and guilt were annihilated. It was him. It was truly him. Tears froze on Jack's cheeks as a wave of emotion. So powerful it eclipsed the pain, and the cold washed over him. He wasn't just a ghost. He had been looking for him. Kaiser sensed the futility of the heavy chains. He nudged them with his nose, then bit at a thick link with a frustrated growl. Realizing it was impossible, a new, more primal instinct took over. He pressed his thick, warm body against Jack's frozen side, a desperate transfer of life and heat. Then, he lifted his noble head, and against the fury of the storm, he began to bark. It was not the frantic yapping of a stray, but the deep, resonant, and commanding bark of a trained K9. Each call spaced for maximum carry, a sound designed to cut through chaos and summon help. Miles away, at the ranger station, Eli Vance paced like a caged wolf. Jack was 6 hours overdue. The storm had descended with a speed and violence that was terrifying even to a seasoned mountaineer. No signal from his radio, and the roads are impassable, a junior ranger reported, his voice tight with worry. Driven by a gut feeling he couldn't ignore, Eli pulled on his heaviest gear and drove his truck as far as he could toward the lodge where Lily lived. He found the girl pressed against the window, her small face pale with worry. Her grandmother, Martha, stood behind her, a woman whose calm was as deep as the mountains she had called home for 70 years. Her eyes, dark and perceptive, met Eli's. "He went after them alone, didn't he?" she stated, not a question but a fact. Eli nodded grimly. "I need to organize a search party, but in this visibility, you are listening for the wrong things," Martha said, her voice quiet but firm. She pulled a thick woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You are listening for machines. The mountain doesn't talk that way. You need to listen for the ghost. Lily says he's looking for something. I think he's finally found him," though his practical mind rebelled. Eli trusted the woman's wisdom. He gathered 2 other rangers, and they set out on foot, their powerful flashlights cutting feeble beams into the swirling vortex of snow. For almost an hour they fought their way up the ridge, shouting Jack's name into the wind with no reply. Then Eli stopped, holding up a hand. "Quiet!" Through the howl of the wind, they heard it. Faint, but rhythmic and insistent. Woof, woof, woof. A sound of unwavering purpose. "That's not a wild animal." Eli breathed, his heart pounding. "That's a call." They followed the sound, stumbling through deep drifts, their hope a tiny flame against the storm. The barking grew louder, more desperate, guiding them. Finally, their flashlight beams broke through the trees and landed on the scene. There was Jack, slumped against the tree, pale as the snow around him but alive, and standing guard over him, a magnificent German shepherd. His body a shield against the wind, his head thrown back, barking defiantly into the heart of the storm. The recovery was slow, measured not in days but in the gradual return of warmth to Jack's frostbitten fingers and the fading of the deep purple bruises on his skin. He spent a week at the small clinic in the town of Polbridge. But his true healing began when he was released into the care of Martha at the lodge. Kaiser, who had refused to leave the clinic's porch, was now a constant, solid presence at his side. The great German shepherd, no longer a ghost of the mountains but a living, breathing miracle, seemed to understand his role perfectly. He lay for hours with his head on Jack's lap, his steady breathing a calming rhythm that soothed the frantic, fiery memories that had plagued Jack for years. The guilt that had been a suffocating shroud began to lift, replaced by a profound, humbling gratitude. The weariness in Jack's eyes was finally receding, giving way to a quiet strength. As soon as he could walk the length of the lodge's porch without his head spinning, he met with Eli. They sat in Martha's cozy living room, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. "I remember them mentioning a name," Jack said, his voice clear and focused. "One of them told the other to make sure the shipment for Billings was ready." It sounded like a regular arrangement. Eli wrote the name down in his notebook. "That's a start, but not enough for the county to act on. We need something that ties them directly to the assault and the illegal logging site." A few days later, Jack knew what he had to do. He needed to go back to the ridge, back to the tree that had almost been his tomb. It wasn't about reliving the trauma, but about reclaiming the place from the fear that clung to it. With Eli and Kaiser beside him, he made the trek. The storm had passed, and the forest was pristine again, covered in a blanket of glittering snow. When they reached the tree, Jack ran a hand over the deep gouges the chains had left in the bark. While he stood there, lost in thought, Kaiser began to act strangely. The dog whined, sniffing intently at the base of the tree, and then began to dig with a focused intensity, paws sending snow flying. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured, kneeling beside him. Kaiser's digging revealed a small, dark object buried beneath the snow and pine needles. Jack picked it up. It was a worn leather wallet. Inside was a driver's license belonging to a man named Caleb Thorne, and tucked into a pocket was a greasy receipt from a Billings-based lumber distributor, dated 2 days before Jack's attack. It was the concrete proof they needed. A piece of evidence dropped in the struggle and perfectly preserved by the storm, found only by the keen senses of a dog who had returned from the dead. The end for the loggers came swiftly. Armed with the receipt, the name Jack had overheard, and a warrant, the Rangers and the county sheriff's department descended on an old abandoned sawmill just outside of Billings. The entire crew was there, including Caleb Thorne, caught red-handed with a truck full of illegal old-growth cedar. They surrendered without a fight, their callous arrogance crumbling in the face of undeniable proof and the cold reality of justice. Weeks later, the first signs of spring had begun to touch the mountains. The iron grip of winter was loosening, and meltwater trickled in the creeks. Jack stood on the porch of the ranger station, watching Kaiser play gently with Lily near the edge of the woods. The dog was a local legend now. His story whispered with awe around town. He was no longer a sad, lonely ghost, but a hero, content to rest in the sun and accept the gentle affection of a small girl. Jack turned to Eli, who was leaning against the railing beside him. "I want to propose something," Jack said, his voice steady with a newfound purpose. "I want to bring back the K9 program. We have technology. We have manpower. But we don't have this." He gestured toward Kaiser. "We don't have instincts like his, or a bond like the one a ranger can build with a partner. They can go where we can't, sense what we can't." Eli looked at the old dog, who now sat proudly, watching Lily with patient, knowing eyes. "I don't want a new dog," Jack continued, his heart full. "I want Kaiser to be the first member. He's earned his retirement, but I think he has one more job left in him. He can help me train the next generation. He can be their teacher. A living example of what true loyalty and courage look like. Haltbracking." End of quote. A slow smile spread across Eli's weathered face. "I think that's the best idea I've heard all year, Callahan." That evening, as the setting sun painted the snow-capped peaks in hues of gold and rose, Jack and Kaiser stood on a high overlook, the same ridge where Jack had first seen him. They looked out over the vast, protected wilderness that was their home. Jack rested his hand on Kaiser's strong back, feeling the steady, familiar warmth beneath his palm. The ghosts of the fire were finally gone, replaced by the quiet promise of a new dawn. They were no longer two separate broken souls, one running from the past and the other lost within it. They were whole again, a ranger and his K9, partners and protectors, standing together, their watch just beginning. Some bonds are not broken by distance or time. They are simply waiting for the right moment to call us home. Kaiser's loyalty was a silent promise, kept through fire and ice, a warmth that could outlast the coldest storm, and a memory that could find its way through any wilderness. These are the stories of quiet courage and unwavering devotion that we cherish. If your heart is also moved by this kind of love, we invite you to subscribe and continue this journey with us, as we honor the animals who remind us what it truly means to never give up on the ones we belong to.